The news at the moment is fairly miserable. There's a war in Europe, famine in Africa, unprecedented US China tensions over Taiwan, global energy shortages, and a widespread drought to remind us of the looming climate emergency that threatens to cook us all alive. However, viewers will be glad to hear that for once, we're coming to you with some good news. And that good news is that food prices, which were previously at record highs and predicted to go even higher, have actually started to come down. So, in this video, we're going to be looking at why food prices have come down, what might happen next, and why that's truly brilliant news for much of the world. So, before we get into the good news, a bit of context. Even before the war in Ukraine kicked off, global food prices were worryingly high. Supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic had pushed prices up about 30% in 2021 compared to 2020, according to the UN's Global Food Index. Now, the war in Ukraine only exacerbated this problem for at least three reasons. Firstly, Ukraine usually accounts for a significant fraction of global food export, hence its nickname as the breadbasket of Europe. Secondly, the war and subsequent sanctions disrupted potash fertilizer exports from Russia and Belarus. And thirdly, the war pushed energy prices, and specifically gas prices, up to record highs, which had a knock-on impact on food prices because, well, farming requires energy, and ammonia fertilizer is usually produced as a byproduct of natural gas combustion. Anyway, with these factors combined, by March, food prices were up another 30% or so, and were about 70% higher than they were in 2020. Even then, most analysts expected them to go even higher, thanks to surging energy prices, difficult weather, and the fact that Putin didn't look keen on letting Ukrainian grain exports out of the country via the Black Sea. However, over the last few months, food prices have nearly fallen back to their 2021 levels, with the latest data from July showing an 8% decline compared to June, amounting to a 12% decline from its March high. This is actually the fourth consecutive monthly decline, and the steepest monthly fall since October 2008. Now, this sharp drop was driven by falls in the price of cereals and vegetable oils, with especially steep declines in the price of wheat, which fell by 14.5% in July, and palm oil, which is largely because of a good harvest in Indonesia, the world's largest exporter of palm oil, and as such, it now sits below its pre-war price. So why is this? Well, it's tempting to attribute this to the deal between Ukraine and Russia that was brokered by Turkey and the UN, that will theoretically allow Ukraine to export produce via its Black Sea ports, subject to checks from Turkish authorities. So far, though, only a couple of Ukrainian ships have actually been allowed out, so it's unlikely that this deal has actually made a material difference on global food prices. Although it is worth noting that the news about the deal might have dampened some speculative pressure on prices. Instead, though, it seems that the reduction has mainly been driven by an impressive global harvest. While this might seem hard to believe, given that the news is full of stories about droughts in Europe, China, and East Africa, the weather was actually pretty good earlier in the year, and as such, farmers have coped pretty well. China, for example, saw a harvest about 1% larger than last year, and Russia is on course to export a record 38 million tons of agricultural produce this year. This is in part a consequence of the fact that farming continues to become more efficient over time. Data from the UN-affiliated Food and Agriculture Organization shows that cereal yields per hectare have nearly tripled since the 60s, which is one of the reasons why, despite a growing population and expanding appetites, we're actually using less land for agriculture than we did in the 90s, reversing a 500-year trend. Now, it's important not to overstate how good things are. Food prices are still very high by historical standards, and poor weather has adversely affected European and American harvests. But this is nonetheless very welcome news insofar as it will provide much needed respite to the growing numbers of people suffering food insecurity around the world. The latest report from the World Food Security Information Network shows that record numbers of people are at risk of food insecurity, driven largely by humanitarian crises in the Horn of Africa and Afghanistan. So this news about food prices is surely good for them too. In fact, Africa was particularly affected by Ukraine's inability to export its produce, and countries like Ethiopia and Sudan are also currently struggling with civil and interethnic violence. And many are hoping that this drop in food prices will alleviate some of the suffering in these crisis-stricken regions. This drop in prices is also good news because it makes food protectionism far less likely. That's when agriculture exporting states block exports to guarantee sufficient supply for their domestic population. And food protectionism is bad news because it pushes up prices on the global market, leaving import-dependent countries, mostly in Europe and Africa, far more vulnerable to shortages. Now, fortunately for those of us living in importing countries, governments are generally less worried about guaranteeing domestic supply when food prices are falling, even when they're already higher than normal. So hopefully we'll be seeing less protectionism as a result of these price changes. All in all then, this drop in prices is good news, and hopefully the decline will continue into the future. It's also a reminder that while the world is in a bit of a tough spot at the moment, it will probably pass. Food prices have gone up before, and then they've come back down. Similarly, the world has gone through geopolitical contortions and bouts of economic unrest before, but they usually subside eventually. That's not to understate the scale of the challenges facing the world at the moment. But as a media outlet, we're very aware of the fact that in tough times, the news cycle can feel utterly dystopian, and this can make us forget that it will probably pass in time. As a final thing, if you think we should make a more active effort to cover positive news, or at least make more of an effort to avoid doom-mongering, then let us know in the comments. And possibly even go and watch our podcast, The Editorial, where we discuss this topic and other elements of our editorial process. While we're promoting our own stuff, we've just launched a brand new YouTube channel, and I think you should watch this. Musk, Zuckerberg, Gates, Cook, Bezos, Buffett. These are some of the most powerful and influential people in the world right now. Mark Zuckerberg is an unelected, all-powerful leader whose ability to reach billions every day literally cannot be reined in. Tim Cook runs a company which has a market cap higher than all but 7 countries' GDP and more cash on hand than the US government. Jeff Bezos controversially employs an absolute army of staff. In fact, an army of staff bigger than the US, British, Canadian, and New Zealand armies combined. And Elon, well, he's busy playing fast and loose with the very system of commerce and stock exchange right now. And saying that isn't going to win me any subscribers from Elon fans, but it's true. These leaders, these businesses, wield immense weight in our world, and yet are often treated as abstract figures shuffling money around, as heroes and business deities, or as criminal devils. In my world, though, things are never that cut and dry. I've been running a series of politics YouTube channels for about 5 years now, so I know a thing or two about powerful people and the deals they do to maintain that power and get things done. And to be honest, these people are often more powerful than the leaders who win the elections and political battles that I normally cover day to day. So let's take a look at the politics and power of business. Let's not allow our eyes to glaze over when the spreadsheets get dense. Let's not be distracted by flashy products or fancy sales pitches. Let's examine these businesses for what they really are. Let's look at the politics of business and how these people and companies change our world. And if that sounds good to you, then hit subscribe and take a look at TLDR Business. If you're interested in TLDR Business, then there's a link in the description. So click that, subscribe, and ring the bell. Thanks for your support.